Thank you, everybody, for coming today to the Cyprus webinar featuring one of our great partners, Shipyard. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items to go over. First off is that, yes, the event is going to be recorded, and we're going to share it out with everybody who signed up for the event in a couple of days via email, and the video will also be posted to YouTube within the next week or so as well. So look out for it there. If you have any questions for our presenters today, we do have the QA functionality and Zoom enabled. So go ahead and post your questions into the QA portion. If you ask them in the general chat, they might be missed, but we'll be monitoring the QA panel specifically for questions. We like to invite everybody to come and join us on the Cypress Discord and our community sites, and we'll have links to all that fun stuff at the end. And that's what we have. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to be doing today. So I am actually super excited for this topic because I think Shipyard is something that's going to be really valuable for users who, for our Cypress users. And particularly, like, how do you deal with setting up environments for your test cases? And so that's what we're going to be hearing about today. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So our topic today is speed up your end-to-end testing with ephemeral or preview environments. Yep, we went over all that. And to just give a brief introduction, I'll go first since I'm currently talking. I am Ely Lucas. I am from the DX team over here at Cyprus. And I kind of do all this fun stuff like webinars and stuff. Marisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa. I'm the developer advocate here at Shipyard. Connect with me on my Twitter at Marisa Data Nerd. I basically, as a developer advocate, I connect the developers who use Shipyard to the developers who make Shipyard. So, and I'll hand off to Benjie.
Hey folks, I'm Benjie, co-founder of Shipyard, and really excited to kind of dive into how you can use these environments with Cypress. We do it ourselves, and a lot of our customers do as well, and kind of excited to share how to do that to push the whole test before merge concept, and also help everyone speed up stuff. So super excited to be here, and thanks for having me. And as I said, I'm a pizza person on the East Coast and a taco person on the West Coast.
There we go. Okay, well, we'll get back to that after we're over. Okay, Benjie, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Great. All right. So we're here to talk about how to speed up your end-to-end tests with ephemeral or preview environments. So super excited to be here and happy to dive right in. One thing to note is that we are actually going to be giving away a little promo code to get a little bit more free Shipyard. That'll be at the end after Marisa, right at the end of Marisa's demo. So stick around, check out that promo code. Or if you're watching on YouTube, fast forward to that if you want. Just kidding. Okay, cool. So what we're here to talk about is, first off, I don't think I need to sell any of you on how important and valuable end-to-end tests are, and specifically kind of how awesome Cypress is for enabling that. But they do get slow, and they can slow you down. And we've kind of identified a bunch of different things that tend to happen. There's too many tests. They can be flaky. Maybe something's broken. Maybe there's a dependency issue, or maybe there's a timing issue. We all know about timing issues with end-to-end testing. That can be a pain. A lot of the times also you're waiting for a testing environment. You might have a shared testing environment, and maybe a developer is using that to run their tests, or a QA engineer is using that to run their tests, and you're kind of just waiting. You got that Suez Canal thing. Data seeding, databases, that could be a big problem. You run a test, it breaks in the middle for some reason, or a suite of tests. How do you get back? How do you reset your data? That's a big problem as well. And then in general, sometimes when you have too many tests, things are flaky. Sometimes you don't know if they're broken tests and you actually need to update them, or if they're flaky. And so these are kind of the things that are the big things that slow folks down. So the typical way that we see folks using end-to-end tests are running on staging environments or late in the process. So you have developers developing, you have pull requests happening, merging to main, deploying to staging, and then you're testing. And as you can see just from this illustration here, you again, you have the Suez Canal thing. So you only have this one, maybe 2, 3 staging environments. And what we are saying is that that's a little broken. That methodology is a little broken. You should be testing before merge. But the problem when you have only one or a few static environments at the ends is it's a limited commodity. Kind of already talked about that. There's missing dependencies. When they're broken for whatever reason, maybe it's not a testing issue, maybe it's an infrastructure issue, they are blocking. And that's a big problem we hear about a lot. And it's also a huge distraction for DevOps folks and even developers in some instances where you need to have people pushing and fixing problems for you, and you're not enabling QA teams and QA engineers to do these things on their own, and it's a big distraction. And you're taking away DevOps resources and developer resources for that matter. So there's a faster way. Test before merge. And we feel very strongly about this, and we're really excited to show you an example of that. But basically, on every code change and every commit and every pull request, you can fire up what we call an ephemeral environment or a preview environment or a feature environment. There's a few names for these things. And what you do is you enable your teams to have that almost instantaneous feedback loop. So it's also parallelizing it. And so you can see just from the slide right here, kind of how you unblock stuff much earlier on. And then you don't get into all these other problems. The solution to that is using ephemeral environments. What ephemeral environments are is that they're full stack environments on every code change. The key factors are that they're full stack, they're isolated. So if I break it by doing some test, or I'm a developer and I change something and I break it, that's okay. I'm not blocking my other fellow QA engineer or even developer. They're also short-lived. These environments, these full stack environments, can get a little expensive. You need to maintain them. You need to make sure that they're not alive all the time, or you're going to have a very expensive pre-prod bill that some CFOs and some other folks are not going to be happy with. And then they need to be easy to access. It can't be screen share, ngrok, tunneling, this and that. It just needs to be a URL that your QA teams and your CI, your CD can just go to in parallel. And so that's really what ephemeral environments are. Now, there is a community site that I would encourage everyone to check out. There'll be a link at the end. It's called ephemeralenvironments.io. And it kind of talks through in depth a lot more of these best practices around ephemeral environments. And I encourage you all to check it out. Pull requests welcome on that, and questions welcome on that. So what we're seeing with our customers, okay, so Shipyard is an ephemeral environment management platform. So we actually automate all of this, but we're not just advocating for Shipyard, we're also advocating for ephemeral environments as a design pattern in general, especially with running end-to-end tests. But what we can tell you from the wild, what we see with our customers, these are some of the pain points they have with end-to-end testing. Fixes get delayed for long periods of time. Getting a developer to fix a bug because the developer is not getting the feedback that a test is broken for potentially days or even weeks at a time. If you have that instantaneous feedback loop by they push the code and then they already are having their test suite run, it helps a lot. Collision issues or toe stepping. If you're running your tests on a shared environment, one team is running one set of tests on one PR, another team is running another set of tests on the same shared environment, but it's a different PR. Like, are they actually broken, or is it just these two things aren't working together, or my test is running first and there's a timing issue? That's a big thing. And then specifically when it comes to like DevOps folks, they have a big problem too, where they're spending about 30% of their time focusing on these pre-production environments rather than their SLOs and making sure production is going very strong and well. So these are kind of like high level pain points. We see a lot more, but it's kind of the big stuff. So where Shipyard comes in is we enable teams to move in parallel. So what happens is that I'm developing locally, I make a PR as a developer, and automatically Shipyard actually turns on a fully ephemeral or isolated environment. When that happens, a good example we've seen a lot of is Circle CI, GitHub Actions, Argo, Flux, whatever Jenkins, a lot of CI platforms, it doesn't really matter. They can use Shipyard's API along with Cypress to actually run that either a subset or a full test suite of those Cypress tests. And you can actually get almost immediate feedback to the developer or to the QA engineering team saying, hey, this new feature actually broke something, or we're missing coverage here. And you could shift everything left, and it enables folks to move in parallel. So that's really powerful. And we feel that this is the way, and for those Mandalorian fans out there. So what it actually results in is we see a huge reduction in flaky tests because you kind of actually are able to understand which tests are flaky because of collisions, because of timing issues, because of feature changes versus which ones are not. So this is some aggregated data. We see on average, people are able to remove 42% of their tests. That doesn't mean that they're running less tests. They're actually running more tests. They're just running them smarter and earlier. But they're also able to say, hey, this test is no longer applicable, or this test is actually covering these other tests. We've kind of like moved on from that, and we're able to prune these things. So by having this immediate feedback, that's a big thing that we're seeing teams get a lot of value out of with using ephemeral environments and Cypress and all this types of stuff. So to kind of recap here, ephemeral environments solve the slow testing issues. I didn't even get into this. Marissa's going to show you in the demo we're about to do, but getting your state and the data working. Again, these are isolated environments we're talking about. So PR environment number 1 and PR environment number 2, they actually have different data sets. So you can be destructive to PR environment number 1 and destructive to PR environment number 2, and it's not gonna cause a problem. You get rid of excess extraneous tests. The flakiness kind of calms down. Tests are always gonna be a little flaky. We all know that, but that's okay. And obviously you're not waiting for testing to free up. Broken tests, we can't fix that. We still need you guys to help us with that, but we can kind of identify them a little sooner. And the staging environments, limited commodity, missing dependencies, when they break their block, distraction for DevOps, it solves all those problems. And so again, this methodology. Marissa's going to share how to do this. Very excited to show you that, and excited to take questions on all this stuff as well in a second. So I'm going to give it over to Marisa for demo time.
All right, Benji, real quick before we jump in, we had a
Sure.
question pop in that's more about the concept of this. And so I'll go ahead and ask you live. And so we have an ephemeral environment equals a temporary branch. How is that idea different from like something like a serverless deploy or deploying using the CDK? And I assume that's the AWS CDK.
Right. So obviously this depends on what the stack of your application is. If you're a serverless application, you still would probably want to use ephemeral environments. In that sense, it would be in the serverless world. So the key idea here is that it's isolated. So your data and your services, they're unique. So that would be kind of the key there. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that the key here is that you have isolated copies of it. So if you're already doing that in some way with serverless, that could be valuable to you. But serverless ultimately is probably hitting some type of data source. If you're doing CDK, I'm assuming it's an AWS thing. So you might have some shared RDS or Postgres or MySQL database, and you really want to have that as an isolated piece of your infrastructure, so you can run these tests in parallel. And if something breaks on the data side, you can kind of reset that and not block other teammates, if that makes sense.
Cool, awesome. All right, one more, and then we'll move on to the demo portion. And so James says that his company used to develop and maintain an in-house solution running Kubernetes clusters, but it was discontinued because the cost was unsustainable. So have the costs of this type of workflow come down in recent years, and are there some optimizations, economies of scale that can be made?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. And you're absolutely right. Things have come down in cost. Okay, obviously I'm a little biased here, but with platforms like Shipyard, we manage we have something called the SLV, or since last visit. So keeping these resources on when they're needed is the key. And that's a non-trivial thing to do. And that's why you might want to use a platform. Well, you should use a platform like Shipyard, of course. But being able to know when these environments are needed and turn them off and on dynamically is key. And one of the things that was happening kind of early on in this whole ephemeral environment movement was you were doing one-off clusters. So Kubernetes clusters in particular, and those can get very expensive. These are pre-production environments. So what you really want to do is you want to have, and this is getting a little technical, but namespaced environments in a single Kubernetes cluster where you're sharing compute, but it's isolated on the namespace level, at the pod level, or the container level. So I think the key to keeping costs down is only having them on when you need them to be on. And again, that's a big feature that Shipyard does. That's a feature of Shipyard. That's something that you should implement if you're doing your own ephemeral environment solution internally, if that makes sense.
Great.
So yeah.
Okay, so do please keep your questions coming in. We'll have a little bit more time at the very end to go over the rest of them as well. And
Awesome.
Turn it over to you, Marisa.
Okay, so I'll just share my screen here. All right. So, okay, you guys can see my screen, right? Just give me like a verbal confirmation here if you can't. So I'm going to
Yep, sorry. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Good. So today I'm going to give you a little introduction to Shipyard, and we'll walk through how you can use Shipyard to manage and create your ephemeral environments. And then I will run a local Cypress test against one of those remote preview ephemeral environments. And then pending time, we'll maybe show you a few other goodies of Shipyard. First thing we're going to need to do is actually log into our account. So I'm on the shipyard.build website, and I'll log in here. So you log in with your GitHub. And this is the Shipyard Dashboard. So what I'm going to do right away is I'm going to act like a developer. I'm going to jump over to GitHub and make a code change to this app. So by making this code change, we're going to actually see how Shipyard can automatically detect that PR and start spinning up an ephemeral environment. So that ephemeral environment will be able to spin up in the back as I walk us through the dashboard and give a little bit of information to you about how this is going to work. So right now I'm just navigating through, and I'm going to just change a visual aspect of our app. Our app is currently in light mode, and I'm going to change it to dark mode. And I will show you all of this in a moment. We just want to get that up and running. So I'm going to make a commit. I'll give it a good commit message, right? I'll give it a dark mode. And I'm going to create a new branch for this. And I'm just going to call this Cypress demo. And I'll propose those changes. So this is something that your developers would be doing. They'd be opening these pull requests to the main branch for you. So I'm just getting that set up. Okay, so let me introduce you to this dashboard a bit so you can see what Shipyard looks like. Each tile here represents a repository that your developers will have hooked into Shipyard, and they are using ephemeral environments to track different changes in different PRs. As you can see right here, Shipyard has already detected that PR that I just opened, and we're spinning up that ephemeral environment right now. So it takes a couple minutes because these environments are full stack. So you'll see that the state of this changes and eventually will turn into a visit button like this one once it's ready to go. Okay, so the base environment of your code is right here. This is linked to the main branch of your code. So this is your single source of truth. This is where you're merging all of your features into before you push them to production. This is currently running because I just wanted to save us a couple of minutes, basically, of time. But as you can see, and as Benjie mentioned, these spin up and down automatically. So this one is set to spin down if no one visits it in the next 2 hours. Now I want to show you just how complex this app is, because I did mention that it's full stack. So here in the services overview, you can get a good idea of how full stack this environment actually is. It has a back end, it has a front end. We have multiple database connections open and running. And we also have this local stack dependency, which local stack is a cloud service emulator. If you've never heard of them, they're pretty cool. You can check them out. It's this full stack aspect of your ephemeral environments that allows this really great end-to-end testing experience. It gives you that accurate testing. And you can do that because this is basically a mini production environment. So as you may have guessed from the name of this app is based in React and Flask. And then of course, for this Cypress webinar, we have added in some Cypress tests to that. Okay, so let's actually take a look at what this app looks like right now. So here's what our app looks like. It's in light mode right now. So when we look at the PR that I just opened, we'll see this in its dark mode. And basically, again, we have a couple of tiles that tell us how we can interact with this app, how we can update the appearance, which is what I had just done. And we also have this API call count that measures how many times that has occurred. So on our PR here, now I already mentioned that that spun up automatically and is preparing our app right now. But what I wanted to say here is, that this is, that this comes from a different branch because it's kind of a child tile underneath your base environment, right? So anytime you have an open PR, you'll get a new environment and a new tile underneath that for as many PRs as you currently have open to your base or your main environment. So while this app is finishing getting ready, I'm going to open up the code locally for our Cypress testing. So I'm going to open up my terminal, and let me just make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Hopefully that is a little easier. And I'm going to basically just navigate to my local copy of this code. Okay. So here is that local copy. You can see that I have my Cypress directory here as well. So let's open this in VS Code and take a look at what we're going to do today. Okay, so we have our Cypress directory. We have our end-to-end tests that we're going to be running for this particular webinar. And we have our first test file here. So we have two tests that we're going to run just for simplicity's sake. The first one is a simple test that just checks to see if we have the right logo in our app. The second test is a test about the API call count. For whatever reason in this app, we have decided that we expect this value to be greater than 1,000. So the last thing that I want to talk about for setting up is, of course, Cypress needs to know what URL to visit to actually run your tests on. Generally, when you're running locally, you would probably be running these tests on a locally running app. So here in line 6, this cy.visit, this would likely be some sort of localhost 3000, localhost 8080 that you would pass in and run your tests on. However, the whole point of what we're doing today is we want to run these on our Shipyard ephemeral remote environments. So the way that we've set up this app to do that is we have this .environment file. This .environment file is included, but you can add it to your git ignore. That way you are not passing any or committing any sensitive information or secrets to your GitHub repo. So in this file, we just simply have two lines. We have the base URL for our environment that we're going to pass into Cypress. And then we also have the bypass token. Now, the bypass token is specific to Shipyard because your ephemeral environments are protected with SSO. So we need to prove to Shipyard that when we're programmatically accessing these environments, that we are actually authorized to be there. So that's what that bypass token allows us to do. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where you can access this information from Shipyard. So the first one we'll get is this bypass token. We'll copy that over and we'll put it into our file. So to do that, in the 3 dots menu right here, we have the visitors tab. So this is where you copy that bypass token right here. And while we're in this page, maybe I'll just show you quickly that you can have other SSO visitors. You can authorize as many or as little people as you want to access your app. And we have this handy little interface here where you can add their GitHub username, and then they'll be able to access that environment. Or you can actually add them with a Google email address as well. So you can invite externals to this who maybe aren't developers, so they could come in and see potentially the latest changes. Maybe you have a special customer that you partner with and you want to make sure that they are happy with a particular integration or whatever may have you. So we'll copy this bypass token and we are going to put it into our .environment file. So I'm just going to paste that in. Okay, and yeah, okay, just want to make sure and I will save that file, just to make sure. Okay, and now we will head back to our dashboard here. And as you can see, our app is now ready to visit. And this is default to 3 hours, by the way, as well. So I had this up and running a little bit before that. Okay, so let's visit the front end of our app and actually see what it looks like in the dark mode. So there is our app. It's in dark mode now, right? So this is what it looks like. And basically, we're going to be running our Cypress tests on this particular environment. We have our API call count at just over 6,000, or so I should say just under 7. And if you remember, the API call count from our base environment, that was much higher because, as Benjie had mentioned before, we make independent copies of these environments and their databases, so they don't interact with one another. So if I was to reset the counter here to 1 time, then on the main base environment, it does not affect that at all. So completely independent. Okay, so what we need to grab from here is this URL. So we're going to copy that when we'll paste that into our base environment here. Paste that in and save. Now we are ready to run our Cypress test locally. So I will open Cypress, npx Cypress, and open. Okay, so we're running our end-to-end tests, of course. I'm going to do this in Chrome. Okay, so for the Cypress community, this probably looks super familiar. Cypress is now running locally on my computer. And as soon as I click this first test button, our test will run. Now, some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, she just cleared or reset that API call count. So the second test we've designed to fail on the first try. And that's because in real life, databases get messed up, excuse me. This happens all the time, and it's a real pain to fix. It's no joke when your database goes down. Many of you probably know that seeding databases, seeding environments with testing data can take a long time and be a real pain in the butt. So the thing with Shipyard is you can actually do this really easily because we have a super powerful feature that's unique to us, which is data snapshotting. And when you use data snapshotting in conjunction with ephemeral environments, it kind of turns into a bit of a superpower. We are going to be able to reseed this environment with good data with the click of a button. So I'm going to show you how you can do that right now. So we will head back to our Shipyard dashboard. And in this 3-dot menu, I should say again, we have our data dashboard. Now I'm going to quickly reset this snapshot, and then I'll go back and I'll tell you what's kind of happening here because it's quite cool. So I'm going to load this particular snapshot in because I had a note for myself here about the API call count. Okay, so I just want to review what I did there because this is going to be super valuable, I think, for anybody who's running their tests and they run into any sort of collision issues. When you create an environment with Shipyard, we take a snapshot of the base environment. It's the same idea of that parent-child relationship for the environments themselves. We also have that with the data, and we store all that information for you. This is the data dashboard, and this is where we store all these snapshots for your environment. Now with Shipyard, you can take any snapshot from your history of snapshots and load it into any running PR environment. So these are the 2 snapshots that we have from our current environment that I just created. So this was the initial snapshot that we made when I set up the PR. And this is the load that I just did, the loading snapshot, that is currently copying over right now. You can see the status of what's happening here. Now, the cool thing is that, well, maybe even better than cool, the amazing thing about this is that you can load this in from your base environment or any PR. If I had multiple PRs open, I could choose any one of those and load in a snapshot. This is the entire history of your main branch. That's what this is. So in fact, you can see here, I can load more snapshots. in. And then if I scroll down here, you can actually see this is the initial snapshot. So that's the first time that I loaded in this app into Shipyard, and we immediately started taking snapshots of where the data was. Now notice we have like an initial snapshot and these automatically generated ones when different PRs are merged into my my environment and new things happen. We also can take manual snapshots as well. The manual snapshots can be super powerful because let's say you load in or you open a PR, a developer, you run your tests on them, and then all of a sudden this test fails in a really weird way or something gets broken in a really unexpected way. What you can do is you can take a manual snapshot of the state of your database and everything about your environment, and basically leave yourself a little note. And then that way you can reload that snapshot in at any point in time. So as I've been chatting here, our snapshot has remounted, so it's completely mounted in. So if you guys have any more questions about the data dashboard, we can always come back to this, but I want to continue the flow. So I will go back and I'll rerun those Cypress tests now, and you'll see that they both passed this time. So head back over to Cypress. I'll open my dashboard again, and we'll just hit the rerun all tests button. And that just that easy and just that quick, we were able to reseed that environment with our good data, and all our tests are now passing. Okay, so what I demoed today is a really slick way and a really quick way of actually iterating and when you're testing locally. Now, of course, in the real world, you're not sitting around waiting for PRs and running these tests locally. You're using some sort of a CI, GitHub Action circle, something like that, to run your tests automatically for you. And as Benjie alluded to, Shipyard actually has an API. So everything that I've done here today can also be accessed programmatically through that. So, and in fact, we had a GitHub Action running. Let me just, I have to just drop this down because I've got my sharing screen covering that. So as you can see, we were actually running a GitHub Action that ran those Cypress tests for us automatically. And that's what this was doing right here. We have a GitHub Action and it ran our Cypress tests. Let's just take a quick look at this. What this did in a nutshell is it set up our job, installed our dependencies, and then it actually automatically fetched our Shipyard environment and that bypass token for that specific PR, and then passed those to Cypress to actually run our end-to-end tests automatically for us. So this is what Benjie was saying when he was talking about how they can get immediate feedback. This can happen right in GitHub, and the developer can get notified if anything is failing immediately. So we have 2 passing tests here. Now, this is just a 1 or 2 line configuration using the Shipyard publish GitHub Action. And it allows you to, again, connect Cypress with your GitHub Action, with your Shipyard environment, so that you can actually run those tests automatically on those remote ephemeral environments. This way, whenever a developer opens a PR or even makes a new commit to that PR branch, this will pick that up, run your tests automatically for you in the background. Okay, so that is the summation of the demo today. And Benjie, you have that promo code. I'm going to hand over the screen share back to you so you can take over again.
Cool. Thanks, Marisa. All right, so everybody, the first 100 people that sign up with Cypress 2023, we're going to give you guys an extra 15 days to try out Shipyard. So feel free to use that, and excited to have you guys kick the tires on it. Now, I know we have a bunch of questions, so we'll let Eli ask us. Go ahead, ask us away.
Yes, thank you, Marisa, for that amazing demo, and thank you, Benjie. We'll go ahead and leave this slide up during the Q&A to make sure that you all have time to track it down and stuff. And let's go ahead and get started with some questions. So up at the top, so my setup is already triggering and running tests after every commit using GitLab pipeline. So what are the differences between this and the suggested ephemeral environment?
So obviously, GitLab, you can configure all that stuff yourself, and you can build out your own pipeline. I think the main difference between, and frankly, we're advocating for ephemeral environments. So if you're already using some type of solution, great, you're doing it right. Now, it's kind of a bit of a build versus buy, I would say. Obviously, we're focused every day on doing some pretty cool stuff. The security layers around that, the management of the compute, so you're not wasting resources, and then also obviously cool things like our data snapshotting and all that stuff. So you might have an implementation of this locally. I saw another question there similar to that, and so you can implement this stuff locally and yourself, but it's really just a matter of, do you want your DevOps resources and your developers worrying about maintaining that type of system, or use a company or a platform like Shipyard to do it for you. I think that's the real difference there. I'm sure that the GitLab pipeline stuff is pretty cool, but again, there's a lot of manual interactions there, and I think that some of the bells and whistles, I guess, which might be an understatement, are probably things that you'd have to implement yourself. So that would be my understanding.
Okay. So we got another question is, will this work with Bitbucket? And I'll go ahead and throw out the other providers out there like GitLab and Azure DevOps and Visual Source Safe. So
the requirement on the Shipyard side is Git. We do have support for GitLab and Bitbucket. We prefer GitHub. We're a GitHub first company, to be frank. But if you guys would like to get into a program using that, feel free to reach out and we can get you set up pretty quickly.
All right. Andreas asks, given that some platforms are huge, complex, and not always using a microservices architecture that are containerized, what are some of the prerequisites to be able to run an environment using Shipyard?
Yeah, so you just said it. You need to be containerized. That is the key here. You need to have your services containerized. Now, there are some folks that have some shared services that are kind of independent, like SQS or something like that they actually use different queues for each one, and that's at the application level. So you can do things like that. But if you're using like a mainframe or something to that effect, yeah, Shipyard can't help you too much with that. I think that it's always a transition, what we've seen. Your entire application doesn't necessarily need to be fully ephemeral out to get value out of it. You can take a subset of that and already bring some value, but the end goal and the best practice is to try and have it as close as possible. Something we didn't even get into. There's 3 pillars of ephemeral environments. There is building and deploying, which Marisa just showed you. There's state management, which is like kind of the database cool volume management stuff that Marisa just showed you. And the third one is actually integrating with third parties. So sometimes you might have like an integration with Salesforce or Google Auth or something like that. So we actually have a solution for that too. We didn't get into that, but there's some pretty cool proxy tech that we have that basically allows you to have one sandbox from Salesforce and actually fan out potentially to multiple ephemeral environments. So dependencies, external dependencies, those are always a challenge, but there are ways around that. And again, it's kind of like an end goal. It's not necessarily where you start off. I think if that makes sense. In regards to sprawling infrastructure that has a lot of microservice, we've seen a lot. I've seen some out there with 500-600 services, and obviously we can handle that. That is based on the amazing CNCF Kubernetes Docker ecosystem. We're underneath the hood for all of what we're doing. We are a Kubernetes company, but yeah, so we're on the backs of giants there. I might suggest that could become untenable. So maybe taken down from 500-600 services is probably a good goal for the team to have. But yeah, we've seen very large sprawling services. And again, the containerization is the key piece there. And then again, being able to have your own system or something like Shipyard to know when they're being used and not used, so you can turn it off and not waste massive amounts of money on and environmental impact and whatnot on that kind of stuff.
Great. Okay, Charlotte asks, are you able to boot up multiple ephemeral environments at once in order to run Cypress tests in parallel?
Absolutely. That's the best practice, and that's the workflow we see all the time. It's great.
Yep. And I think this is going back to your slide presentation, but Andreas is also asking regarding reduction of 42% of tests. Did you move the tests down the testing pyramid, keeping an end test slider and having more lower level code tests? And I think this is something that we've talked about in the past is like you've noticed that there is a reduction in the number of tests that you need to run. Like how do you come about that?
Yeah, so it's not something we expected, but we've seen it consistently. And what happens is that because you're running these tests in these isolated environments, you're able to kind of identify the ones that bring value and the ones that are kind of extraneous. Because as you grow and as you use things like Cypress more and more, some of these tests become redundant or not even valid anymore. But they were flaky and you didn't know if it was real or not. And so by bringing it closer to you kind of get to this place of knowing what tests are actually there. So it's kind of a pruning mechanism, a self-pruning mechanism. It's just a pattern we've seen that's been really powerful, where you actually get smarter, better tests. And so that's kind of what we've seen there. And there are definitely some instances where people are like, oh, you know what, we could unit test this, or we can integration test this. This doesn't need to be, this is kind of covered by this end-to-end test, and like this other little subset one, we don't really need that. So that's actually another thing we have seen. But again, this is like a beautiful benefit of running your tests as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and knowing that they reliably should work. And so when a test fails, you're like, oh, something's wrong, rather than like, oh, someone using this environment, is my data not set up correctly? Like that ambiguity is kind of taken away. And that's something that Ephemeral Environments enables.
Awesome. Okay, I think we got kind of a two-parter here, so I'll ask them at the same time. So how can we create an environment with multiple dependent systems? Like a user registration is a separate system with multiple services, and we have an enterprise SQL database, we have login, and our product just has different monolith applications that need to be spun up. And then the second part of it is like, how much time do these generally take to get up and running?
Yeah. So again, the key is that you're containerized. So Microsoft SQL Server, I'm 99% sure there's actually a containerized Linux version of that now. So what you do is you would have a copy of that. Now, the trick here is that you have some subset of data. You don't want your entire production data set in there for PII reasons, but also just it gets expensive. You don't need to run all that. You need a subset, kind of like what you run locally. That's kind of what we encourage. Maybe there's a dev environment or staging environment that has a good data set that you'd want to use as your seed data set. And then in regards to how long it turns to take on, in regards to how long it takes to turn on, those words. It depends on your stack, but in general, because of the containerization component, it's pretty quick. Now, when we're building, so what Marisa did in the demo was she was building from scratch all those services. It was like 6 different services, including local stack. I believe there's a MySQL database in there. There was a Redis. There was a Python server. There's a bunch of stuff in there, and React, obviously. So she was building those from scratch. Now, aggressive caching and Docker caching and all that stuff, it can be much quicker. But if it's already built and it just, let's say it turns itself off because it's not used for 3 hours, turning that on is, depending on a few factors, is almost instantaneous, maybe 15, 20 seconds. Because again, these are containers. They're very quick and fast to turn on.
Okay, great. All right, Marisa, I think I have one for you here. And I think this is more of a clarification, but James says, to run these tests in CI, we would use something like a Cypress GitHub Action with the bypass token and an environment-based URL injected into the config for the runner. And
so Shipyard has published a GitHub Action. Maybe I can actually show that, and maybe that would help show what it's actually doing there. So maybe I can just take over sharing for a moment. Benjie?
Sure.
Just going to bring up the GitHub Action workflow here. Okay, so just share screen for a sec.
Cypress 2023. Sign up, Cypress 2023.
So here is our GitHub Action. This is the Run Cypress. So Shipyard itself has published an action for you. And what that does is it'll fetch that environment information and those environment details for each PR individually. So what you do is in GitHub, you put your Shipyard org API token into your secrets. So Shipyard knows who you are, and it will pass you the Shipyard environment URL and the Shipyard bypass token. And then you can just use the Cypress GitHub action to pass that information, those environment information in, and it will run automatically for you.
Right. And that's based on every PR, right, Marissa?
Yeah, yes, that is every PR. It will get the unique URL and the unique bypass token for that particular PR environment.
Right. And those, by the way, those bypass tokens are secret, and Marissa will be turning off that environment. So don't think about anything. Who's ever watching this video.
Yeah. And James had a response to your answer there, Marissa. He says, "You really have thought of everything." Smiley face.
We try.
Cool. Thanks for your question, James. Next one. Let me read this. Okay, this might be one that I can probably help chime into. It says, "Hi everyone, thanks for sharing your knowledge. I have a next question. How do you run all your end-to-end tests each week or before a big release or on demand?" So generally we like to say that the best practice is to run your entire test suite as often as possible. Now you have to be practical, and thing about that is that if your entire test suite starts to take a subordinate amount of time to run, then you have to start thinking about different types of strategies. But I think with something like Shipyard, it could actually help us achieve our goal of like running tests more often. Anything to add on to that, Benjie and Marissa?
I think you're exactly right. I think that what we've seen is that the more you run your tests, the more it unblocks your entire team, right? There's this shift left concept that basically when you find out that something's failing, it just gets more and more expensive for the org. So if there's a failure and there's a bug that hits on production, that's not only going to cost you potential churn of your customers, but also customer success, also DevOps folks trying to help address the issue, then developers, and then again, of course, QA people. So that's the worst case scenario, finding a bug in production. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all using Cypress, is to avoid exactly that. And that's the most expensive version of it. So the further you shift left, and the sooner you find those bugs, the less expensive it is. So again, with ephemeral environments, you're shifting all the way to the left. As soon as the developer pushes a commit, you're going to find out that there's a bug. And so it becomes much less expensive to the organization. Now, obviously, that does mean you're running more tests more often. But that's good for Cypress, but I think it's worth it. And ultimately, it really is worth it, because the long-term cost of just even losing 1 or 2 customers is massive compared to just running these tests. And again, going back to that other question, you're able to understand your tests a lot better, and you can use subsets. So maybe I'm working on a user system and somebody else is working on a registration system or something like that. You could run a subset of your end-to-end tests on each environment, and you could have different applications, and then you run them all together, one final validation pass together on that last staging environment as well. But I would say run your tests as much as humanly possible, but put effort into making sure those tests are good and valuable and not too bloated, and finding strategic ways to run the right tests at the right spot.
Okay, and this question is, how do Shipyard environments differ from Pulumi ephemeral environments? And is that?
Yeah, so Pulumi is a great tool. For those that don't know it, it's kind of like a alternative to Terraform. And I think it goes back to that GitLab question. You can implement your own version of ephemeral environments. And frankly, if you're not using Shipyard, I want you to. I think that we're big advocates. Again, go check out ephemeраlenvironments.io. It's a primer to implementing your own. We are advocates for good software and tested software. Obviously, please use Shipyard. But if you're using Pulumi, it's a great option. You will have to implement a lot of this stuff that we kind of talked about. I won't belabor it, but the data piece, the security piece, and a bunch of other stuff. So the difference is you'd have to implement a lot of the tooling around ephemeral environments and how to use those effectively yourself. I don't know if there's a GitHub action for that. I think you'd probably have to write your own, Not sure exactly how to interact with Cypress, but it's all very doable, and I encourage you to do that if you're a big Pulumi shop.
All right, and what is the difference between Shipyard and the Cypress Dashboard? I'll go ahead and cover the Cypress Dashboard. So we actually call Cypress Dashboard Cypress Cloud now, and Cypress Cloud is our service that will let you view your past test results via a dashboard type interface. And so you can go in there and see like what the health of your entire test suite is, what tests are passing, what tests are failing. You can go through and look at video playbacks and screenshots and see like in the code, like where everything was airing. You can get alert to flaky tests and all that kind of fun stuff. And so that's the Cypress Cloud is kind of like an extension of the Cypress app that gives you all the data that happens inside the Cypress app in a nice convenient place to look at afterwards. And then Shipyard is what we're talking about today. It's a different company, but the Shipyard Dashboard is where you go and manage your ephemeral environments and get all that type of information.
Yeah.
All right. Is it possible to have some modules that can cover many repetitive testing apps? Nasir, I think this is probably more of a general question, and I would invite you to come to our Discord channel and ask that one. We probably need a little bit more information on what you're looking for there. All right. And I think this is more of a clarification, but so basically we can say that Shipyard is also an environment in the testing cycle. I think. Not too sure. I would say it is a key piece to the testing cycle.
Yeah, I would say that Shipyard is the software that you use to manage those ephemeral environments for you so that you don't have to do what Benjie was just talking about, building your own pipeline, building your own, spinning them up, spinning them down, making sure that they're isolated. You kind of have to have like a mini DevOps team to do all of that and build that infrastructure out yourself. So with Shipyard or with ephemeral environments, then we basically manage those for you so that you guys can actually focus just on your product and making it the best it can be.
Right. All right, and that brings us to the end of the, we just have one more pop in. Let me see it real quick. James asks, how do you get DB snapshots into Shipyard?
Great question. I think Marisa showed you, but maybe not. You can upload directly a volume in through the interface. We also have a CLI that we didn't even talk about, and that allows you to connect locally to these remote environments. And so you could SCP some stuff if you wanted to, depending on how technical you are. So you can either use the web interface or a CLI to like SCP into the terminal and populate those things. But remember, it's kind of a one-time thing where you just kind of see that base environment, and then from there until eternity, it will kind of propagate itself out to all the children environments. And another really cool thing for the more technical folks is that you can test your migrations on these PR environments without corrupting the data on the base environment. And of course, if something does break, you have that cool dashboard that Marisa just showed you to roll back to a previous snapshot.
Cool. And then one last one. How will Shipyard manage multiple PRs? Say we have 10 PRs at this time. Will Shipyard create a environment / container for each of those PRs?
Yeah, so they'll be completely independent as environment that has its own copy of the data, its own copy of all of that stuff. And the key there is that there's a life cycle that it lives for. So if it's not being used, we will spin it down. But then with the click of a button or an API call, you can turn it back on. So yeah, the parallelization of these environments is the key. So it's definitely more effective. It's very effective for larger teams that have 10, 15, 20, 100 PRs going at once, and you want to test on them in parallel.
Great. Okay, so thank you everybody for all of your questions. And if you have any more, please join us in our Discord server. You can find the links for it down here at the bottom, as well as if you're looking for any type of support from Cypress. If you're a paid user, you can contact your technical account manager. And for community users, we got the Cypress Discord server for you. So I do want to give a big thank you to our guest today, Shipyard. Thank you, Benjie. Thank you, Marisa, for coming out and showing us about that. Like I said at the very beginning, I'm super excited for this because I think it's like really valuable for Cypress users in getting your test environment set up, mainly for like test isolation. Also want to give a big shout out to our Cypress team members, Sean and Ronald, Jenna, and Jess, who have been in the chat, watching over everything and making sure everything's running smoothly behind the scenes. And for that, we'll say thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.
everybody.